Having fun yet?
Today we're just gonna pretty much last time I did a stream I guess a couple minutes ago, but it wasn't necessarily successful because the internet quality in my room is garbage. So I think that I already kind of started off on the sketch, but here it is so far. It's pretty much based on a skull reconstruction done by Fideno on Twitter, as well as a complete skull from the Texas Memorial Museum, which I think is pretty, being Deinosuchus schwimmeri, which is named after David Schwimmer, who was pretty instrumental in describing Deinosuchus in depth, including a revised osteology and just in general writing a pretty good book on its paleobiology. So originally, Deinosuchus was described from pretty scanty remains found in Montana, with some remains being in Appalachia decades before. I would say about maybe 50 years before, from North Carolina. These were mostly teeth, which are not necessarily the best remains, but it's better than nothing, really. Sorry, my eraser fell on the floor, so that's a little something. If you hear noise in the background, that's just my mother talking. I can't really do anything about it, nor do I want to interrupt her in the middle of a phone call, so hope you don't mind it. So far, just drawing the scales underneath the chin, which is pretty fun to do, I suppose. The drawing crocodilomorphs is just something I'm not used to, so that's a little something that's interesting. So let's see. So let's look up crocodile head scales. Sometimes it's just best to look for references in living animals or just how their scales look and whatever. It's a bit of a difficult thing to do, especially if you're working with something especially if it's something as ancient as Deinosuchus. One thing to know about crocodilomorphs, especially modern ones, they don't have scales on their faces. When they grow up, it becomes a little more defined. So that's something of note. So yeah, for the Deinosuchus species I'm reconstructing, it is Deinosuchus riograndensis, which is from the late Cretaceous of what is now western Texas. Many fossils have been found of this big animal since 1940. It was originally discovered in 1940 by Barnum Brown, who you might know as the discoverer of some of the original Tyrannosaurus fossils in Montana, as well as Roland Bird, who discovered the Paluxy fossil, the Paluxy trackway in Glen Rose, Texas. So what we have is essentially a pretty, what we had was a pretty crania. That is not really what we know most of its anatomy from. It's more recent fossils that were described much later on that we have, I would say, a little better of an idea of just generally how this thing looked. So let's see. So I essentially just have to do some osteoderms on there. By the way, one of the most, some of the common fossils of Deinosuchus, if you were to ever find any, mostly these sort of roundish things that look like, they look like crumpets to me. I don't know why. And then you have the teeth. Those are the common fossils that you could find of Deinosuchus. Most of the time, these are from Appalachia. I would say Mississippi, Alabama, and North Carolina is where you would find some of these fossils. So with those are what's the most intriguing parts. We do have a couple good fossils of Deinosuchus. I'd say the holotype of Deinosuchus riograndensis could be one of them, judging from just how much it kind of give the public a perception of just a truly giant fossil crocodilomorph. I think the only other time that was when new fossils of what is it called? New fossils of Sarcosuchus were described in 2001 by Paul Sereno's team. And it's kind of the same situation with that because Sarcosuchus was described in the 60s based on a relatively partial skull. It was definitely recognized as large, but the public didn't really pay much attention to it at all. It was mostly until the early 2000s when a much more complete skeleton was found with a much more complete skull that people were finally able to appreciate the size of something like this as well as just be amazed by it. It sometimes helps sometimes when you have much more complete fossils at hand. So something like Deinosuchus definitely, I mean, at first it was just a bunch of scanty fossils that it was described. Yes, it was a big crocodilomorph, but it wasn't really anything special to the public. Because what's the use of having like really good complete fossils when they're just trash? You don't really care much for them. However, if you hype it up with much more complete remains, I would say, and also just showing, hey, you know what? This is a big crocodile. Here's how big its skull is. In which case, I think the biggest remains of Deinosuchus are like about a couple meters. They're like about 2 meters in length at the most. Actually, I think there's a size chart by Fedena which shows the length of some of the biggest skulls. Okay, so and these which it's still pretty big. It's a big specimen. Here's the one I'm talking about. This one right here. This is TMM 436 436 32 1. Back of the skull, including the brain case. But the holotype of Deinosuchus riograndensis was really the one that kind of gave the public a perception of a big crocodile. From what you can see of it, it's mostly it's the partial lower jaw and also the fronts of the jaws, which is pretty good if you want to get a good idea of how this thing is. However, it was way oversized in its original description because an American crocodile that they used for this reconstruction. And modern crocodilomorphs don't really have wide snouts. They generally have sort of narrow snouts, and it's very narrow at the end. So when you're making, I guess you could say, a very large side reconstruction of a crocodilomorph like Deinosuchus, always be taken into account for these sorts of fossils. So Deinosuchus, due to much more complete fossils being discovered, including one that's 1.18. Get more photos of this, of some crocodilomorphs to kind of get an idea of how to draw them. So first off, let's kind of round the edges of the skull. And I think another thing to notice about crocodiles is that you should do it like so. So what you do is you got to highlight the, I guess you could say, the cheek muscles, because that's what they are. Well, or the jaw muscles to be specific. They kind of pop out a bit, and yeah, so you just draw them like that. Just got to draw it like that. So let's see. So here we got to look at the skull properly. So yeah, okay. So basically, what you got to do is got to make the edges of the skull a bit more round, and then what you got to do is you got to kind of highlight the edges of the skull. Then for that, I also have to. It's very difficult because you get just the skull in general. I suppose. Yeah, let's just erase that a bit. It's a strange thing to try to attempt to draw, but let's see. Yeah, let's see. So I think this is a pretty good start for it. Far. So some things you should know about how to draw crocodilomorphs, and these are very integral steps if you want to reconstruct them correctly. For one thing, the eyes should be a little over the top of the skull. Normally, if you look at crocodile skulls, they look like they have no eyes on their head if you just look at them from profile view. But if you tilt the skull a little, you'll start to see that the orbits are there. If you're going to draw a life reconstruction of a crocodilomorph, make sure the eyes poke over the skull. Because if you look at a living crocodile, you'll notice that they do poke over the skull, and that's to look for prey above the surface of the water, which is why they're good at. Another thing to notice is that the ears should be a little close, like dinosaurs. Dinosaurs have their ears a little farther away from their eyes because the back of the skull is a little less compressed. In crocodilomorphs, though, the back of the skull is a little more compressed, and thus the ears are a little closer to the skull. Something to keep note. And so there's also another thing to keep in mind. So around the nasal area, around the snout, there are two, I guess you could say fenestrae in there. I don't know what they're called specifically. I'd have to see what the technical term for these are. But right around here, there are these two big holes, and I've only seen them in. If you ever look at a Deinosuchus skull and you see those, don't draw those as the nostrils. Cover them up with like scales or whatever. The nostrils go on top of here, and that's so that they're able to breathe above the surface of water if they surface up a little, which, I mean, it's pretty helpful. It looks a bit strange at first, but that's how you're supposed to draw them. So now I just gotta draw more of the integument, I guess. I also just want to generally make it look a little more like a living, breathing animal, which is so one thing you should do is you should definitely highlight how some areas of the skull look. Especially make that skull look a little more prominent. Yeah, you should do that. Just make it look a little more prominent there. So what I'm doing is I'm gonna kind of shade that area because that's a little easy to do. And then when I'm, I wonder what that was for. It's kind of getting a little fritzy again, but yeah, let's see. From what I remember, there are also some scanty Deinosuchus fossils from Utah, which explains why there's a mountain of Deinosuchus over at the Utah Museum of Natural History. But they aren't necessarily assigned to any sort of species, which, I mean, I guess I don't blame them because it's not really the best idea to really base anything to refer anything if it's based on scanty remains, which is why I think tooth taxa are some of the worst things ever to work with. Is you're essentially just basing an entire taxon on some scanty fossils, which are diagnostic to a degree. I think if it has reasonably complete remains and if it's diagnosable from other sorts of animals from that, you should definitely establish a taxon based around that. But you should definitely not do anything like just base it on just a bunch of isolated vertebrae or whatever. If it's just a single animal, if it's remains that are very clearly from a single animal, then you should definitely found a taxa on that, which can be a bit difficult, especially if there are not enough autapomorphies to really separate it from anything else. Which it's kind of the case for Deinosuchus, but it's not really sure what really separates it from other species of Deinosuchus, but it's still valid for some reason. I would have to read a little more on that, but it's a little interesting of a case. So yeah, let's see. Let's see. So I'm just gonna do a little something. Okay, now I finally have a room where I'm actually able to talk without any background noise for the most part. But I think this is it's a bit cramped, but I think I can do with this. It's not really anything. It's not exactly the coziest place, but I think it would be relatively fine to work here. Let's see. So yeah, so far we have this. I'm kind of getting there in terms of it. Right now I'm just shading, just to kind of get the gist of just how to draw some certain things. So I just had to kind of get up for a moment just to say that I was straight. It's a bit hard for me to concentrate with all the noise. I hope my mother didn't take that too personally. I don't think it was an unreasonable thing to say though. But yeah, let's see. Let's see. Gotta do somewhat of a basic shading thing. Oh, hello, August. Yeah, so far, Deinosuchus riograndensis. I think it's a relatively good fossil taxon to work with. I mean, I'm not sure how I would draw something like Deinosuchus schwimmeri because it's relatively incomplete, but I guess it's just how I mean, it's not really incomplete. It's just got a very partial skull preserved. I would probably draw that, but probably with something else for context, as I would do for most of my paleo art reconstructions. I like provide context as to what else lives alongside it, because it helps kind of make it feel a little more like a real thing, a little more feasible. I'm actually just gonna do that there. I have to. It's hard to do this and just like be hunched over. It's a little more comfortable if you're sitting in a pose like this. So yeah, just gonna shade it around there, around the jaws, there. Yeah, it's a bit of a fun thing to try to do that. So yeah, so far, no, Schwimmeri is valid. It's actually it was a new species that was announced this morning. Yeah, so here it is. So Schwimmeri was a taxon that was established this morning, based on a relatively complete skull, missing the tip of the snout though, and also I think a couple other cranial fossils, maybe some postcrania. It's pretty much the only valid taxon that I know of only Deinosuchus as it should be known now, because it's only diagnosable as Deinosuchus on the genus level, not really anything that could be assigned to a species or whatever. So there's that, but it's not really a valid taxon, and it's an old taxon too. So of course, back then you'd have people naming taxa based on teeth. Now there are some tooth taxa that exist in recent times, like for example, Uatchitodon is one. It's it's an archosauromorph from Virginia. It's based on not well Virginia and North Carolina. It's from the Triassic, and it's apparently venomous, reasonably diagnosable. But that's usually for stuff like mammals, which I mean, you have tons of rodents which are based on teeth or whatever, but you can't really do that for dinosaurs and whatever. Uh, Dinosaurs are rarely these days ever founded on teeth or any sort of fragmentary remain of the same animal being discovered along with it. So you'll have things like Timberlangia having a hold type that is a brain case, which normally wouldn't be diagnosable. I mean, well, actually, I don't think what they're similar to, but it's not like we would call it Nomen dubium because we know that fossils of Timberlangia besides that brain case, which is helpful. So, of course, it's not really a bad thing if you want to make that the type specimen. But for something like Polyptychodon rugosus, it's not necessarily the best idea because it's just an isolated tooth. However, we are positive. However, it can be positively assigned to Deinosuchus because around the same locality as the teeth, which are pretty similar to what we know of Deinosuchus's, there are also scute. It's just not really reasonable to give it like a binomial or inserte setus is a much more appropriate title for it. So yeah, let's see. Currently drawing the lower jaw on the underside of it. It's a bit of a stressful thing, and I am dreading having to do the underside of the jaw. It's a big issue to try to work with. I usually don't draw crocodilomorphs. Oh, hatcheri. Well, hatcheri is based on incomplete remains that they're a complete diagnosis. So yeah, currently I think we have 3 species of Deinosuchus. We have Deinosuchus riograndensis from Texas, or mostly from Texas, from what I know. Deinosuchus hatcheri from Montana, which partial skeletons from Alabama and I think Mississippi. The holotype is from Mississippi, which is, it kind of gives me a little more hope for Mississippi in terms of fossils, because normally whenever I think of Appalachia, I don't really think of it much as anywhere for fossils. Which I guess that's just me not having much of a knowledge of Appalachian fossils. Like the most I know is probably some things from Alabama or maybe some things from the eastern, like very far east on like the Carolinas or whatever. But I never really think much of anything to find a lot of really good Appalachian taxa because it was just, I guess preservation wasn't really the best over there. Oh yeah, I was talking about rugosus earlier. Yeah, just about how like it's not really a taxon that should be. It's not a valid species, and also it shouldn't really. It should only just be considered Deinosuchus, inserte setus, because of just its fragmentary nature and whatnot, instead of an actual valid taxon. So yeah, so currently just drawing. Check for references of crocodilomorphs. Okay, so now when drawing crocodilomorphs, you should probably do this little thing. You should yeah, so I don't know, maybe it would be also a good idea to try doing something like a Deinosuchus drawing stream. I don't know, just like a, it's like anybody who's watching, probably try your hand at people drawing something like this. I think I'm getting ahead of this. As you can see, I've been drawing the scale, not scales. I need to cut that out. It's like it didn't have any lip balm, and its lips got chapped. Some crazy thing, I'm just saying. Don't take it too seriously. But yeah, that's just how it is for this fella. It's kind of like, of course, like I'm pretty sure that most, not like anything very early. I don't think they probably would have had like bare teeth. I think much later is kind of when they had. Well, I mean, crocodilomorphs probably had some probably had lips, but we don't know honestly because we don't really have any way to tell. Studying how lips really are is something that's a bit difficult to try to figure out in general. Yeah, it's a big mystery in a way. Anyway, here it is going so far. I'm very proud of this actually. I'm very happy with how this is coming. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna uh, teeth look like that. It's a very interesting thing trying to make them look somewhat realistic. One thing you should probably do whenever illustrating something like this is very well define the teeth. Around, so you can just so we can all just have a nice discussion. It also drop some questions. Don't be afraid to ask anything, I suppose. But yeah, just in general, not really a bad idea to ask how everyone's doing on this beautiful day, I suppose. Saying I suppose because I don't know if it's a beautiful day. I only went out like a couple minutes ago just to walk the dog. It was a bit sunny. I watered the plants earlier. It's a pretty fun thing to do, watering the plants. Getting a decent amount of sunshine, I suppose. So yeah, that's how it is. Hope I'm not cutting out or anything. Oh, good. Yeah. Goodness. So yeah. Devils. Yeah, so gonna do more stuff for the face of Deinosuchus. Yeah, so head so far. Pretty much happy with this. Yeah. So I should probably do a little more scales around there. Or somewhere around there. Not gonna make it too prominent. Just wanna show off the basics, I suppose, of just like how you should just kind of an experimentation in light in a way. Yeah. So construction done for the American Museum of Natural History for the display of the original skull of Deinosuchus riograndensis that depicted it attacking a chasmosaurus by a lakeshore. And so it's probably the most intriguing because you actually get to get a feeling of size of this big crocodilomorph just rising out of the water, attacking a pretty medium-sized dinosaur. If we're going to be honest, that's not too big, but it's not necessarily a small dinosaur either. It's a relatively, um, I guess you could say, relatively I would say it's about the size of just like your average, like a little bigger than a rhino. Deinosuchus could get pretty big. Although I would say that it would probably be scaled down a little more now, considering that the original fossils were that the original skull was based on American crocodile, and the snout on American crocodile is a little like if you made them the same length and whatever. And so now Deinosuchus is would probably be around a little smaller in that painting, but it's still it's still a pretty impressive reconstruction, I would say. I don't know where it is now, but probably wouldn't throw away something that beautiful. Oh yeah, something to do sometimes with some of these is make sure that you give it you're actually looking at something with depth and something that has shape. So we're gonna shade the underside of this. We're gonna do that. So yeah, here it is, Deinosuchus so far. So let's see. See, yeah, should probably made a big oopsie on that one. But yeah, overall, I think that just make sure you reconstruct the osteoderms well. And osteoderms can be a bit of a pain to figure out sometimes, but get them right. I think you can be on the right track. So yeah, we're gonna slightly do that. It's a bit difficult to make them look like. I think these are actually scales now instead of just like the jiggly parts in the neck, not like the big, I guess you could say, more flat scales. I think those are, if I remember correctly. Yeah, let me show them a little more after I kind of give a little more realistic touch. Yeah, and then these sorts of things. Get a little more. Yeah, so here it is so far. Getting a lot of this done so far. I'm very happy with this on here. But yeah, Deinosuchus, but just kind of a reconstruction of a skull of one was over at the Natural History Museum of Utah. I think it's a bit dated now considering what we know of it, but still pretty impressive. Because like this thing was standing in front of it was standing next to a Hygriphus that was on display, and there was two Pterodophoniuses in the back. And Pterodophonius is like a medium-sized tyrannosaur. It's like about a little about the same size as Tyrannosaur, or not Tyrannosaurus. It's about the same, roughly a little larger than Allosaurus, but it was just big. It's just flipping big. It's big flipping crocodile. That's what I can say about it. Crocodilomorphs can be sometimes some of the most amazing things. And sometimes just be really scary too, but I guess that's just what happens whenever you compare the sizes of some of these things. Okay, so yeah, so start a little discussion. So any of y'all planning to try Deinosuchus or just